Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 29 of Humanity Rising. Every day since the 22nd of May, we have been broadcasting live, not only on Zoom, but on Awake TV and a half a dozen other partner channels to 10 to 15,000 people a day, dialogues that we've been convening between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time on how we're all navigating through the pandemic and how we can come together more effectively as a movement to shape the post-pandemic world in a way that's more sustainable and resilient, healthy, abundant, and in alignment with natural systems. We wanted to have a summit that would be ongoing because we wanted to keep up with unfolding world events. The pandemic is unprecedented. It's the first time, as we've said many times, where everyone in the world has gone through the same experience at the same time. And that's put us in the same conversation. And one of the most extraordinary things that has happened is that even though the world was concentrating on the pandemic, it was the killing about 3 weeks ago of George Floyd in Minneapolis by a white police officer who kept his knee on George's neck for 9 minutes till he died, that ignited massive protests around the United States and around the world. It's interesting to note that it was a racial event that really galvanized the planetary consciousness in the middle of a pandemic. And it would be interesting for all of us to think through what that relationship might be. Subsequent to his killing, there have been other killings. In the last 4 or 5 days in various parts of the United States, there have been 3 more Black men killed by white police officers. There's been 6 Black men that have been lynched, been hung from trees. Just yesterday in Los Angeles, the brother of a man who was found hung in a tree was also shot by white police officers. So the situation in the United States it could not be more, what's the right word? Distended, obscene, barbaric, troubled, disconnected from any sense of democratic harmony among the diverse peoples. And today, June 19th, is Juneteenth Day. It was in September of 1862 that Abraham Lincoln, as President of the United States, declared the Emancipation Proclamation. And on January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was declared law. The Civil War, which had started in 1861, was still raging. The proclamation of emancipation of enslaved people entrenched the Southern populations and their generals. And led by Robert E. Lee, they struggled fiercely against the Union armies. But by April 1865, at Appomattox in Pennsylvania, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union forces, and all the slaves in the South were freed. But it happened gradually in pockets. And the very last slaves to be freed were freed on a plantation outside of Galveston, Texas, on June 19th, 1865. And ever since then, June 19th has been celebrated as Emancipation Day. It became known as Juneteenth. So we thought that in light of events in the United States, in light of the global reaction that has sustained itself now for nearly a month, and knowing there are going to be all kinds of actions across the United States and the world to commemorate this day, June 19th, we wanted to start the program by just talking to a young Black man who lives in the United States, who lives in Texas, Rod Chambers. He's someone that many of us know. He's been a friend. He has engaged in all kinds of activities, including working as staff for Ubiquity University, is at a company in China. He has done extraordinary things in his life. So I want to welcome you, Rod, on this very momentous day and this extraordinary time in our national history and in global affairs. And would just like to welcome you and ask you to make whatever comments you would like to make about George Floyd and the events since then, and what it's been like for you and your friends to grow up Black in America. And then we'll just sort of take it from there. But thank you for joining. It's very important, and we deeply appreciate it.
Well, gratitude to you, Jim. It's my pleasure, man. I really appreciate you providing a platform for voices to be heard in all spectrums. And so if we could, given some of the information that you shared, actually some of the lynchings I've not heard about. I have taken a intentional sabbatical, for lack of a better word, from watching news and social media as pertains to some of the things that are going on around the country. I think that it's healthy in a lot of cases to pull back from some of the constant pictures and videos and news and commentary around the race issues. And so that being said, I'd like to take a moment of silence and just really respect those who have gone on in such a horrible way. And then also, out of respect of all of our ancestors, I'd really like to make their presence be known in this moment, because I think it's very important that we all have that conscious access to our ancestors to help us to move forward and to really deal with these very complex and very historical issues. And so if you all don't mind, if we can just take a few seconds and just come in and just have a moment of silence and respect for the moment and the occasion. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. As Jim has mentioned, my name is Roderick Chambers, and I am a native of Texas. I've lived around in a few different states in the United States. I like to say happy Juneteenth to those who actively celebrate it. And I'm going to put a little link um, in the little chat box for those who maybe want to read a little bit more on Juneteenth. Um, to start the conversation, it's a really loaded question to ask my experience as a Black man living in the United States. I guess it's just as complex as asking anyone else what their experiences have been living in the United States. But in relation to all the things that have been going on, I perhaps start with some of my own experiences and then my experience watching part of the video of George Floyd and then some of the other videos that have surfaced and some of the other events that have gone on for a number of years that we are now being thrust into having to really deal with in a very visceral kind of way. Growing up in Midland, Texas, I was actually born in Midland, Texas, AKA bushland, if you will, to parents who were teenagers. My mom and my father were about 14, 15 when they had me, and I'm 9 months younger than my older sister. So 13, 14-year-old parents to start off with created a very different kind of experience for me that some may share that experience and maybe many do not share that experience. And I think it's important to note that my experience does not cover or represent the entirety of the Black experience or Black male experience. And so out of respect for many other Black Americans, I vocalize that with intention. But that being said, as I've grown up, I've seen a very different kind of experience in terms of how two very young parents, babies raising babies. And I have to say that my mother, my father are definitely some of my soldiers because they are still here today with their right minds, prospering as much as they can. And I think for the most part, through all of their hardships, they're no longer together, but through all of their hardships, the wisdom that they have out of their experience has been very instrumental in my life as I've traversed through my own life experiences. My mother has been a beautician for almost 40 years, and my dad has gone on to be a football coach and has 2 masters and has really been a model for me in many ways in terms of the academic route and has always pushed education and has always pushed me to be as diverse and be as exposed as possible so that in situations like we're experiencing today, that I do not limit a people to individuals' actions. That being said, I'm not negligent to the many systemic issues that happen within our country, but I think that those very core values have been very important to me because it has allowed for me to really, in a very deep, I can't even say simple, but in a very deep way, to bring all of those experiences to how I'm learning how to isolate the problems that we see today. When I saw the video of George Floyd, and again, I did not watch the video in its entirety. I think for many of us empaths out there, you can only take in so much, but I saw enough to know that it was a murder and it was very intentional. And you could feel the hurt and the very direct blow in many ways of that situation. It was something that it wasn't news, and it's unfortunate to say that it was news in the sense that it was just another situation that was being broadcast. But it, in the back of my mind when I first watched it, I really didn't know what kind of impact it was going to have, not just from a national aspect, but from a global aspect. And I've had to think about previous situations, with the Brianna situation. I didn't even learn of a Brianna situation, the young lady who was gunned down in her apartment, until after the George Floyd situation. I knew about the Marbury situation in Georgia because I just so happened to be leaving a funeral. One of my aunts had passed away, and just so happened there was another situation that happened in Midland, Texas, where a young man, a 21-year-old, was arrested in front of his grandmother's house, and police had pulled out guns, and it was a sight to see, because you see so many people, or so many police officers, bring in in my opinion, unwarranted force, unwarranted attention to something that probably could have been resolved very easily. And then in lieu of everything going on, the grandmother gets knocked down. So I learned about all of this at the same time, only to come back to my hometown a week later to see the George Floyd situation happen. So it was just a lot to try to break through during that time. In that, I had to really reflect on the moments where I've been pulled over by police officers. And I have to mention that all of my experiences have not been negative. They have not been that maybe that drastic. I have had some where they have been. I've had to be conscientious about what the situation was, and just to call it what it is. I've had to wonder about the racial profiling, being pulled over, cases where my family has been blocked into a convenience store by a police officer and the community, all under the notion of believing that we stole gas, which was nowhere near the truth, but it was a smaller town that likely have not been exposed. And we were at the hands of a community that it was just something that I'd never experienced at that level in my teenage years. Since then, as I've talked to my parents have disclosed to me their own situations in the recent last couple of months, where my mother and my stepfather were essentially followed by a Caucasian woman who pulls out her butcher knife to essentially threaten them. And I don't know exactly what she meant by her actions, but she's taking out her butcher knife, and she's kind of insinuating to them whatever she's insinuating to them. My dad, in a whole different city, begins to communicate to me how he's been threatened to be killed by two different neighbors. So all of this, taking all of this in and really having to see where we are as a country, and really starting to deal with some very, I can't say new events, but very real situations, very salient situations that are happening right now. It has been a bit overwhelming. I think at this step in my process, as I've taken in what's happened, as I've taken in the pain of it, the anxieties of it, I'm really looking at ways that we can really heal, and ways that we can really, as we deal with the hardships of it, how can we really engage in conversations like this and feel that there is some level of not just being heard, but in some cases a therapy. I think many people that I've spoke to the last couple of weeks, what I'm realizing in my non-professional assessment is that the country and the world overall with the pandemic, I think everybody's going to need some level of therapy. And then I think for Black America in particular, perhaps having to watch the videos and watch the memes and watch the news or listen to the news, there's another level of therapy that needs to be had to really address releasing and addressing some of the anxieties that come around with constantly seeing these kinds of images in the media. I think that there definitely needs, as we have the conversations, I think that there definitely needs to be a sense of forgiveness, because for some people, they've never had the conversation before and they don't have the right words to say. And in some cases, we're developing new language around how to have the conversation. And I think in doing so, there has to be an intentional forgiveness that allows people to voice their opinions and allow them to sound ignorant, allow them to not say everything correctly, and allow people to express in a way that the anger is heard, and not trying to be quick to stifle the anger, and not trying to be so quick to stifle the expressions, allowing people to get that out with the goal intent in mind that we get through this, not as a rush and saying, well, just get over it, but to get through it in a way to where, in my heart of hearts, in my hope, that we'll never have to see this kind of issue again. And so before I palaver too much, those are my initial thoughts about some of the situations that are happening currently. And Jim, if you have any questions, please feel free to dive in. I think I do better with questions anyway.
Well, thank you, Rod. Very poignant narrative. I wonder, just as you view the United States right now, within the context, obviously, of nearly 4 years of the Trump administration, is it your sense that race relations are just getting worse objectively? Is it your sense that the Black community is being empowered in some way to resist in sort of a whole new wave of civil rights activity? What's your intuitive read on
Sure.
the situation and sort of what will now unfold?
You know, Jim, thank you for the question. I think that's a fantastic question. You know, as you've mentioned, I lived out of the country for a few years, and I'll share this story. When I got back to the country in late 2017, I wasn't as much on social media, so I really wasn't paying attention to as much that was happening in the United States. Some things I did, some things I didn't, but all that to say, I love to walk around in neighborhoods, and just because I just like to be in nature. But as I'm walking in one of my first walks when I came back to the country, a car had sped by, and they launched one of those super 7-Eleven super big gulps at the back of at my back, at the back of my leg, and I could not see who the person was. I did not know if they were white. I didn't know anything, but at that moment, it did question the back of my head. What am I really dealing with? You know, what is this that's happened? Because this has never happened to me before. It wasn't long after that, then as I'm walking around in a different part of the neighborhood, I see some Caucasian in a car that I don't think I knew who they were, and I hope I never, I didn't offend them in some other previous life, but I get fingers thrown at me, the entire way around the block, and it's just like, what did I just step into? Because this is not necessarily been my experiences prior to me leaving. I'm not saying that I didn't have other kind of racial experiences, but it just seemed like since the administration had come in, there's some questions that I've just had to really address that I wouldn't have probably put into context had it not been for much of the rhetoric and much of the events that were happening as Trump was coming into office. And I'll say, man, I've spent some time, made intentional time these last couple of weeks to really go through and watch the Fox News and really watch. I'm not signed to any particular party, but I've made intention to go and watch what Black Republicans are saying, and to really get an understanding of where the arguments around race are really being had from all sides of the community. And I'm seeing that obviously there are many varying opinions about race right now, but it's hard for me to say that the things that someone like Trump, the things that he has said over these last few years have not fueled certain racial movements that have made me just really come to a certain conclusion, man. And you know, the academic side in you, the scientist side in you wants to say, well, before I give a credence to this, let me just really consider the evidence. And it's hard, man, to dismiss the evidence. And it's a long way to say it, man. I think that Trump being in office and much of what Trump has said has really created a lot of chaos, and a lot of necessary chaos, I would add.
What do you mean by necessary chaos? That's an interesting phrase.
Sure. Given that we are in a pandemic right now and we are having to be at home, many people, are subjected to, maybe a heavy word. Many people are subjected to watching, filtering through the internet and watching television and whatnot. There's issues as a collective that we have not wanted to address. And there's been several analogies that have been displayed, about putting a Band-Aid over a wound. And I have to agree that for many years, we've been able to put a Band-Aid over the wounds of racism, of slavery, all these kinds of things, of violence, of, from every community. I mean, all of the isms and schisms of issues and dysfunctions, we've been able to put Band-Aids over this. And I think the pandemic alone has really thrusted much of these very hard pressing issues to the forefront in a way like never before. I mean, who knows what kinds of stories we'll hear about, children being left home with relatives that they should not be left home with, or, parents who are fighting physical. I mean, all of the kinds of addictions and things like that are being pushed to the forefront. And I think that the president of the United States is in some ways very symbolic of helping to really thrust things to the forefront that we otherwise will continue to make excuses for, justify, and we'll keep moving on. So that's what I mean by the necessary chaos for us to have these kinds of conversations.
Beautifully put, Rod. Beautifully put. Thank you. I think we have to move on with the program at the moment, but I want to just deeply appreciate your extraordinary elegance of spirit and the precision with which you've articulated both emotionally explosive, but also politically and historically unbelievably complicated issues in a very short amount of time, and it's so good to feel your courage and your integrity, and the stature that you carry with such extraordinary elegance. So I just want to acknowledge that, Rod. It's what attracted me to you from the very beginning, and it's an inspiration. So thank you for taking the time to just help us commemorate Juneteenth on this particular day as we move forward with Humanity Rising.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for the time and the platform.
Yeah. So everyone, that's one voice that's out there, and it is such a tragic situation in the United States, as Rod was saying, that the effect of the Trump administration has been both to heighten the contradictions and to make the excesses more obvious, so that there's no longer the possibility of turning the eye, because there's no more neutral ground. It's an extraordinary situation to have no more neutral ground, where the complacency of normalcy, which can lull us into almost a sleepwalking, where we don't feel much in our lives. We shop, we have our jobs, we watch TV, we read stuff in the news, but we don't really pay much attention because our lives seem so normal. There's no normal anymore. The pandemic has shattered normal. The Trump administration has shattered normal. So as Rod was saying, I think very, very correctly, we all need therapy now. We all need some psycho-emotional, soulful, spiritual solace. When Humpty Dumpty's pushed off the wall, how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Because in the little poem, all the king's men and all the king's horses could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So this question of how we orient ourselves, what norms do we now cling to when all around us is fake news? How do we really come together when we're told that we have to keep social distancing? How do we think about the future when we don't even know what the future might be? These are deep questions that go to the heart of both our predicament and the possibilities of renewal. So it's in that spirit that I want to segue now to the main topic for today. And that is the whole emerging phenomenon, first, of crowdsourcing. When I first talked with Ludvik, who's the CEO of Crowdsourcing Week, a brilliant, articulate business executive, I was completely mesmerized by his notions of crowdsourcing, because that at the heart is what Humanity Rising is trying to do. We're in the problem that we're in because the governments and the prevailing elites, the governing interests, are profiting so handsomely off the desecration of the planet and communities all over the world that we're now in a predicament of unprecedented proportions. So in some way, we've got to figure out crowdsourcing. In some way, the most strategically important issue I believe we need to address as a human race is, how do we human beings individually, in voluntary associations, through networks, proceed until apprehended? Just doing it because it's the right thing to do. So I'm delighted that Epi Ludvik, who's in Singapore, and it's very late in the night for you, Epi, I know that, so doubly thank you. He's going to give us a presentation on crowdsourcing, and then we're going to hear from Marchello Palazzi, who is one of the co-founders of Now Partners and who's been around in the movement for social change and human betterment for 30 to 40 years. He's a veteran of corporate social responsibility, founded the Progressio Foundation. We'll then hear from Marcello on business renewal and regenerative economy, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So that if any of you in the course of these presentations wants to ask a question, just put it in the chat box. I'll note it, and then we'll weave it into the conversation. But I want to just thank again everybody for commemorating Emancipation Day. And now I'll turn over the floor to Epi Ludvik. Epi.
Great, Jim. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for being here, and appreciate your dedication to focus and bring what really humanity needs. And I think we need conversations like this. Rod, I just tell you one thing, that as a first generation immigrant to the United States, I never understood the racism that existed. And when I went and lived in Georgia, I found out that happens, and I was in shock. How could that be? Just because of the color. I had no idea. And when I moved to the United States, I was a young boy. I have a background where I came from a little tiny country that you guys know now. It's called Kosovo. And back then, Kosovo was going through turmoil. And during that time, a few years before, this was part of Yugoslavia, my dad passed away from cancer. And so I was a little boy, and look at my mom going through that experience of defeat, and the country going to shambles and systems just completely nowhere. I found that we all can take a responsibility to make the world a better place, but it starts with us. And it starts taking care of our family, and taking care of our neighbor, and taking care of our friends. So I'm with you with this, but I strongly believe that this issue that we have today, it is deeply rooted for a long, long, long time. And I think we need to completely address with a very, very hard questions these problems that existed for a long time. And I'm not here to say who's right and who's wrong, but all I'm saying to all of us, we are us. It doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter what background we come from, we are us. And this is what got me and led me in this journey of a crowdsourcing. When I understood the power of crowdsourcing, I said, oh my God. I left everything in New York. I was running a small boutique advertising agency, pretty chic. Everybody called me crazy when I told them I'm doing this crowdsourcing week and I got to do it now. This was 7 years ago. And the most shocking for most of my friends was that I got to do this in Asia. So I packed my bags and came to Singapore without knowing anybody. And I decided that I got to do it here. And the reason why I started doing here was because there were some facts that were there for me. There were no conversation in crowdsourcing whatsoever in this part of the world. And Asia itself represents quite a big crowd itself. So I came here in Singapore and started this conversation on crowdsourcing. And I must tell you, it was a difficult journey. It was worth doing it because I know for a fact that we have the power more than we can think when we go collectively and do this thing together. So what I want to do is I want to take this opportunity and address things in a different way. And I think it's worth thinking a little bit like, how come these things are happening now? And a lot of times we do not ask these questions is because we just get caught in the midst of distractions. And when distractions happen, we end up listening only one side of the story, but we don't know the other side of the story. But most importantly, we don't know the true story. So it's super important for us to understand that what we're going through this right now, the racial profile that happened in the United States, that's happening all around the world, it has existed for a long, long, long time. And we must address it, and we must stop it. We must stop all the way to the root of the problem. And why I think crowdsourcing is so important, why I believe that crowdsourcing is so powerful that can change the world, is because it all comes down to the human element. We as a human, we have everything. We do not need an artificial intelligence. So what is the race that we're going after today? Is it the race that we're going for the power? Is the race for the control? Or is just simply the race for the mind share? And I want to share some of the slides that I brought to you because I want you to see the big picture in a visual way so we can all understand where are we right now? This is what we need to address it. Where are we right now and where are we going? We have a huge opportunity in front of us to turn things around, where the abundance is waiting for us. It is waiting for us to just grab it. But we are so preoccupied with things that is distracting us. So allow me to share some of the slides of what I'm doing with Crowdsourcing Week and how I believe that crowdsourcing, it is the way that we should train these artificial intelligence, the technologies and algorithms that we as a human being, we have a most important part in all of this information age that we're talking about. So let me know when you just put yes that you see my slides here, and then we start the presentation.
I don't see them right now. I don't see them. Can you please share them again, Happy? Now I start seeing them. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I just told you about the race for the mind share. And this race for the mind share it's happening at this time because this time we're living in the information age. We have left the industrial age, guys. And as we left this industrial age, we are experiencing a huge pain. And this huge pain that is coming, it's coming because people are not ready to embrace this. So what this means, it means that this we need to have a more of moral machine learning here. Do we want machines to have a moral machine? Or do we want to have a machine that is going to work for us? And it's so important to understand this, because if we do not understand it, we're going to miss it. We're never going to have this chance ever again. So for the 7 years that I've been working in crowdsourcing journey, every single year we introduce a theme. And obviously this theme that I was not planning this way, but it just happened that we felt that this theme for this year is about Crowd 2.0, about crowdsourcing, powering AI and machine learning. And when you think about these things, you think about like, wait a minute, what crowdsourcing and how crowdsourcing can fit in this, how crowdsourcing can bring this collective consciousness so we can get to the super intelligence. Because in the end of the day, all we're looking for the AI is to bring us to this super intelligence. That's all we're waiting for. That's what we're looking for. But why are we putting so much trust in the machines and we're not putting so much trust in the human beings? This is the question, ladies and gentlemen, we need to ask. It is our time to face it and ask the hard questions before it's going to be too late. Now, this crowdsourcing movement that it started 7 years ago, it started developing in a way that no one have thought that today we have so many tools out there. They're enabling every human being to be part of this crowdsourcing world. And it just, when I think about a little bit for a moment, I'm starting to think every time when I talk about crowdsourcing, I always have to explain, because everyone asks me this question, so what is crowdsourcing? Or the other question that I have is crowdfunding. And when I go deep into this subject, I also want to understand that people have a complete different thoughts about what crowdsourcing means and what crowdfunding means. So we created this diagram that explained in a visual way where crowdfunding fits, when crowdsourcing fits as a big picture, where the crowd intelligence is, and the list goes on. But it's also important to understand like where and how all of this started. And when you look where all of this started during the global recession. I call it this first wave in 2007 to 2009. And you have this birth of these platforms of from the freelancers and Ubers of the world that we know, and Airbnbs to the Kickstarters and so on and so forth. And when we look into this, like you need to figure out like why this thing happened during this time. It's because people were looking for alternative ways to do things. But now the question comes like after all of these years, from 2007 all the way to 2020, is what are we doing in the World Wide Web? How are we spending our time in the World Wide Web? And I'll always like to bring this question of what if? What if we bring 100,000 people or more working collectively together to solve the problem? Are we doing that right now? Do we have 100,000 people coming on the World Wide Web solving a problem? And the answer is probably not. But if you look at very deeply, you look at these three pictures, is that you have a pyramid which was built with 100,000 people working together. We send man on the moon with 100,000 people working together. We built a Panama Canal with 100,000 people working together. All of these things that we think these are like amazing projects, we build it with people. We built it with 100,000 people. As a matter of fact, the Great Wall of China, it was built with 100,000 people. Now, when I say 100,000 people, I don't mean exactly 100,000, but what I mean that in that range, we had 100,000 people coming together to solve the problems. So my question, like, what if we bring millions of people on the internet to solve the problems that we have today? Why can't we do that today? And the problem that we see that because of the distractions that we have, humans are born innovators. But what we do with our time in the World Wide Web, it's a completely different question. And the reason why I want to bring this slide to you is that I want you to see it very clearly. And you probably have seen this Gangnam Style video that came from Korea probably 10 years ago. It was the internet sensation, and this particular spot alone got over 3 billion viewers, which means collectively it took over 200 million hours spent collectively watching Gangnam Style, which is an equal of a 20 Empire State Buildings. We could have built 20 Empire State Buildings just of what we have wasted time watching Gangnam Style. We need to wake up, guys. We need to wake up. This is our wake-up call. We need to move away from distraction. And we need to go to the core, to the root of the problem. Because unless we solve the root of the problem will always be there. And if we don't, we are in trouble. And what I want you to bring here, I want also to bring some good elements of what crowdsourcing, how crowdsourcing can be used, and how an enterprise is enabling people to be part of this crowdsourcing movement. About 3 years ago, I met this lady. She is the deputy editor of MIT News Labs. This is her full-time job. Well, during her part-time, she had a passion for these 5 women of NASA, and she had everything about them. She had their signatures, she had everything. She met them, she took pictures, she had lunches, dinners with all of them. These were 5 women of NASA that were challenging NASA back in the days because there were no women astronauts. Now this lady, because of her passion, she came across this Lego Ideas, and she ended up putting that project in Lego Ideas. And Lego Ideas is a crowdsourcing platform that enables you to create a toy together with Lego. Here's the wise way to use your time on the internet. What happened next is that this toy was produced by Lego and ended up being in the hands of kids that inspired other kids to think and do something great and to bring stories that otherwise this sort of would have been completely archived in the libraries. And this is the reason why I keep saying, like, we must wake up. We must respect our time first before we respect anybody else's time. And if we respect our time, if we focus on our goals and we address the root of the problem, we will not face this type of challenge that we have today. And this goes back to why we're here. We're talking about this collective consciousness. This collective consciousness that is primarily is for super intelligence that we're going for. This race for the mindshare that we have. This race for the mindshare that we have is completely for the super intelligence. But we do have it. It's in us. Why do we need a gadget? Why do we need Elon Musk to bring us a machine in our skull and make us a half a human, half a robot? I respect this man very much. I respect what he does, but let me tell you something. Humans are the only species on the planet that can think abstractly, communicate complex thoughts, and culturally, I'm talking about culturally, accumulate information over the generation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you the bad news. The cyborg is not going to give you a culturally accumulated information over the generation. That is not going to do it. And we must ask the question, do we want to be like this? This is the question that we must ask. And I think the answer is no for many people. I'm talking to the normal people everywhere I go, and I don't think that we want to be like this. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to wake up. What I want you to see, I want you to see something and pay a very, very big attention here. If you look at during the industrial age, over the years or centuries, if you look at in the 15th century, it took 400 years to double the knowledge. And if you look at closely coming into the 20th century, it took 50 years to double the knowledge. There were some horror events happened during the early 1900s. Are we asking these questions, what happened in early 1900s? Or we just completely forgot about it? Well, I know for a fact, I know because the markets have a very short memory, guys. I do know because I come from a country in a part of former Yugoslavia and Kosovo. And a lot of people, they forget there was a war. But look closely here what happened. So during that time, there was this big thing was happening. Well, this big thing it's happening again right now. If you look at very closely in 2017, there's a tipping point that started to happen. We are in 2020 and the knowledge is doubling every 12 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have any more time to waste. The knowledge is doubling every 12 hours. So why do we need an artificial intelligence that is one is like being in our skull and another one being through a vaccination like this? I have nothing against vaccine, but let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we must ask questions. This is super important. It's our obligation, it's our duty to ask the right questions. Not just any question, but to ask the right questions and to get the right answers. We must respect creation of God. Full stop. There's no alternative whatsoever. Human being is a spirit being. If we rely in the algorithms, we are doomed to fail in a massive way. Algorithms or algorithm or whatever, how many algorithms are out there, does what it does. And no matter how special the algorithm is, it does not care. If we clasp our heads grasp in dumbstruck horror or absurd inappropriate actions. This is super important. We are a spirit being. And we only have one choice to make. out of two. And that is, do you want to have a systematic superintelligence? Or do you want to have a super consciousness that has already a collective superintelligence? Thank you.
Wow, Epi, that was very powerful. Thank you so much, and thank you for your words of solidarity with Rod earlier. I mean, those of you who remember the war that happened in Kosovo know that it was one of the most brutal sectarian wars between the Serbs and the Muslim minority of the 20th century. It was an extraordinarily dehumanizing conflict from which the wounds still emanate. So, race in America is one of many areas around the world where issues of ethnicity, race, class, gender play out in quite violent and brutalizing way. And so I just want to acknowledge that part of the world too, Epi, on Juneteenth Day. There's many fronts to these battles. And so, and thank you for your delivery. I mean, this whole notion of the power of the crowd, it took a huge crowd to build the pyramids, a huge crowd to build the Great Wall of China, to put a man on the moon. And when you think of how much time we collectively are putting in just watching inane shows on TV or the gangsta videos from South Korea, I mean, it just boggles the mind how much time we waste while Rome is burning. And so your admonition for us to focus and pay attention to the power of machines is extremely important for us to hold. I know this is a major theme. If any of you've read Yuval Harari's books, Species or Homo Deus or 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, like Epi, he's saying that probably the most momentous event in all of human history is happening now. And it is the projection of consciousness. Up to this point in history, consciousness has been located in biological systems. And what we're doing is we're putting consciousness into machines. And Yuval Harari, like Epi Ludvik, are saying, pay attention, folks. Pay attention, folks. This is huge. And we're not giving it sufficient attention. And at some point, something is going to happen that we will deeply regret unless we start becoming more proactive. So thank you, Epi, for that. Let's now turn to Marchello Palazzi. He'll make a presentation, and then we'll open it up to dialogue. But you've given us very rich material. Thank you so much. So Marcello, welcome to the broadcast. I mentioned before Marcello, he's a very old friend and colleague. He's now the co-founder of Now Partners, and he's been working tirelessly for many decades, as it says, to harness the power of business to help address society's greatest challenges and to build a regenerative economy. Marcello?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. Wonderful to be with all of you. And I really resonated with both Rod and Epi. I was just a couple of hours ago on a phone call and a video call with a a commission started by Pope Francis, about 20 of us, helping the Catholic Church rethink the new economy, or the economy we want to have in the future. And of course, we touched upon many of the issues that Roderick talked about. How can we build an economy which is inclusive, that includes everyone in the world? And of course, for the Catholic Church, this is really global. And we also, and I will show how, we really also touch upon what Epi was saying about the amazing power of all of us people, and how we can work collectively together. So I'm going to talk about something I've been doing in the last 5 years. I've been on the journey of, through my foundation, Progressio, whose mantra is human progress to entrepreneurship. And in the last 5 years, I was asked to create a movement in Europe called the B Corps, which is a global movement of what we call best for the world companies. Now 3,400 around the world and 750 in Europe, which are working towards this regenerative economy. So I will scroll through the presentation. I won't read everything, but you can see on the screen. So there's a historic global culture shift, which I think we heard earlier. So how can we really turn economic actors, and which is not only businesses, but it is social businesses, it is cooperatives, it is public-private partnerships, small businesses, everyone actually who is working around, working as an economic actor. How do we turn these into a regenerative future? So it requires a systems change, obviously recognizing that the system we have built, fantastic in terms of the power of entrepreneurship and capitalism, but very destructive. So how do we go from extractive to regenerative? And I think many of us, including some of the elites that Jim was referring to, are beginning to see that perhaps it's no longer, there is no alternative, but there are viable alternatives. System failure. So again, most of us know these figures. You know, the 26 richest people in the world own as much as the 3.8 billion at the bottom of society, 60% decrease in wildlife, all this tons of plastic that we are putting in the environment, plus of course, as you know, the planetary boundaries and the climate realities that we're living through. Well, this is a little bit of a joke, but you know, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we create a lot of value for shareholders. Well, give me a break. So we're talking about the evolution of business, going from the 20th century's shareholder capitalism, extractive, exclusive, and mono, to the 21st century stakeholder, which is regenerative, inclusive, and multi. So this is not my word. This is the word of Yvon Chouinard, Patagonia, one of our most famous B Corps. This is the future of business, of economy. These are faces. You know, behind every person, every company, every economic institution, there are people. So here you see faces of real people running these kind of companies. You see the third from the left on top is Yvon Chouinard, Patagonia. In the middle line, number 4 is Emmanuel Faber, CEO, chairman of Danone. Below him is Al Gore, etc. These are all people who run B Corps, and they've been doing so for a number of years. This is the community, 3,300 companies. You can see some of the logos, of course, all around the world, US, Europe, South America, etc., etc. The largest is Danone, which is nearly 25 billion, all the way to, I saw that Epi had the Kickstarter. Kickstarter is one of also quite well-known radical companies in 70 countries, etc., etc. There's more, yeah, these are more logos. It's important to say it's 10,000 companies globally, because we also have created a legislation called the Benefit Corporation by law in several countries. We included now Ecuador and Argentina. So together with what we call the certified B Corps, we also have 8,000 companies by law, which I will share in a moment. What does that mean? The growth over the last 10, 12 years. So when I started 2015 in Europe, we're now more than doubled in the last 5 years, and the momentum is really growing. multinational companies. Originally, B Corps were family businesses, Patagonia-like, Ben & Jerry-like. In the last few years, we see Procter & Gamble, Nestle, Danone, Unilever, The Gap coming in, joining with some of their subsidiaries. System change, this is the way we go. This is a kind of our destination, is to build a shared and durable prosperity, inspiring billions of consumers, workers, investors. This is really where EPI's words come in. How do we use the power of the crowd and people to, in a way, change, transform everyone into regenerative consumers and investors and savers, etc. So here I get a couple of details for everyone to understand. A B Corp is basically four parts to it. One is we have over the last 12 years created a methodology, a language, a set of indicators. It's actually a philosophy. We call it the philosophy of interdependence, which through an assessment that asks over 200 questions. It's like doing a scan, like an MRI scan of the company, going from purpose, governance, stakeholders, business models, and looking at all these elements. And if companies score a certain number on a scale, they qualify to become B Corps. And then if they do qualify and they want to proceed, they can certify. And then we have a verification process that certifies these companies. The legal is what I said earlier, that about 5 or 6 years ago, lawyers came to us and said, can you kind of legalize what you're doing here, this set of indicators? So we created this benefit corporation legislation. In the US, it's called PBC, Public Benefit Company. It then passed in Italy, in Ecuador, in Colombia, Argentina. It's now being discussed in Australia, and Taiwan, and Chile. It's basically by law, the owners and the, say, the governors or the directors of a company can decide to change their legal statute so that their commitment to positive impact and, in a way, positive impact, to be beneficial to the world is enshrined in the law. And then the fourth pillar is the community. It's now with 10,000 companies, a very thriving community. And by the way, going back to EPI, we have 100,000 corporate users, and we are really now exploring ways in which we can do what I think EPI was saying. How do we get these 100,000 people to actually really work collectively? So this is here, our friend from Triodos Bank in Europe talks about what is the advantage, what has the bank, derived from being part of this community. Here we have, this is a little detail, but it's very important. It's the kind of things that get measured. So this is actually why it's become the most rigorous assessment and approach to the work of companies. It looks at all these elements. This is the kind of what we call the operational side. This next slide shows the impact business models. This is really about how can a company distinguish itself. So for instance, take in Bangladesh, we have a joint venture between Grameen Bank, Muhammad Yunus, that Jim remembers very well, and Danone. It's called Danone Grameen. And the reason they have a very strong impact business model is because in all their products, it's yogurt and milk, they add vitamins and minerals and additional nutritious elements that are not available while, in society very widely, for the benefit of children and mothers and people, and they basically sell them at the same price, and they will sell a normal yogurt. So this is like an augmented product where on the one hand, of course, you're trying to make your economic model work and you have to be financially sustainable, but on the other hand, you're really adding a lot of attributes and benefits that make this into a positive impact. Tom Shoes is another example of where you are basically sharing some of your shoes with people in need. So that, again, this is a way of showing that you really have a positive impact in society. You can see here what is an impact business model, because nowadays many of you know we talk about the impact economy, impact investing. So what is the actual in the engine of an impact enterprise? So it has to be unique to each particular company. It has to create a significant positive effect, and it has to be actually in the core of the part of the service. It's not a CSR thing or something you put on top of a company. It has to be central to the company itself. specific, material, verifiable, lasting, and extraordinary. Extraordinary, like, this Danone Grameen example is quite extraordinary. We have another example, amazing. In Afghanistan, we have one of the largest companies in Afghanistan called Roshan. Roshan, B Corp, of course, they developed the whole mobile infrastructure. In 10 years, they penetrated Afghanistan society with about 90% mobile penetration. But that was only the beginning. What they really did was that on top of their mobile architecture, they offered educational services, banking services, social services, health services for people in a country that is pretty scattered, where you wouldn't otherwise have access to all these benefits. So this is a fantastic way. In my experience now, after 5 years, I think maybe this is the most interesting and extraordinary model, where you do not only build a business to mobile telephones, but you create a whole social, health, educational system on top of it. So quite amazing. So this is a fantastic example. Systemic solutions, we talk about system change. So you can see many of these big companies have, Danone alone has 150,000 suppliers. So how you can create an ecosystem with the supply chains and all your, where you resource your products from, so that not only the kind of, say, the mother company is regenerative, but the whole ecosystem is. And these are some of the examples. Cities, we have now worked in several cities. We started in New York City, and then Mendoza, Argentina, Geneva, Edinburgh, Barcelona, in creating what we call Cities Can Be programs, where around the cluster of these B Corps in each city, we engage with the municipality and a wider set of companies to share the learning that has gone on, or how can you be regenerative at the ecosystem level. Here are solutions around banks working together. Just last night, we had a video meeting with Bancolombia in Colombia, but also in South America. They are amazing. They have 50 million customers, really striving to be totally regenerative. Be investors. Many of these investors, when we started B Corp, we had a grant from Rockefeller Foundation that simultaneously tried to create an impact ecosystem with impact investors. So we have kind of grown up very close to impact investors. Here are some of the brands of VCs and investment companies that have invested in B Corps. You can see that a lot of the kind of the great and good investors are in there. So it's really becoming quite mainstream. Quite finally, I think this is the last slide, or the one before last. This is our Declaration of Interdependence. So maybe you take a minute to look at it. It's about a global economy that uses business as a force for good, comprised by a new kind of company, the B Corporation. The B, of course, stands for benefit. Purpose-driven, creating value for all stakeholders. And we believe, which I think is what Epi was also saying, and of course Roderick in his own way, in his own context, we must be the change we seek in the world. So each one of us who is working for one of these companies, we must actually, through our work, live and be the change. It's not enough, to do this at the weekend or in your social club, etc. You have to do it at work, every day of your life. Business conducted as if people and place mattered. That basically products and practices, etc., should aspire to do no harm and benefit all. Understanding that we are dependent upon each other and thus responsible for each other and future generations, which is so evident now in the pandemic moment. And then finally, just a fun picture of when we launched it in Amsterdam 5 years ago, with a lot of young entrepreneurs and women, and it's a very diverse community. Over half the companies are young companies run by people in their 20s and 30s. And maybe the final thing I say is that, this next gen, the millennials, people like my kids, for them, there is no other way to run a business or run an economy. It has to be kind of impact driven and purpose driven. So the final word I say is that we are now working on a program which we call Be and Beyond, which is really moving the edge towards regeneration, even more so. So there's a cluster of some of these companies that have got together and I've created a company with some friends called Now Partners. And Now Partners is working with some of these B Corps to take them even further onto this level of regeneration, which of course is an evolutionary journey. We don't really know the final, how far we can go, but to become 100% regenerative is pretty high bar. So far, I could say a company like Patagonia maybe are on their way. Triodos Bank, that's been an ethical bank for 40 years, but there are not many. So how do we actually get more of the B Corps and other companies to become truly regenerative, which I think is the real paradigm shift, is to create this economy which is 100% regenerative. So I am, of course, very excited about this. I think that for me, believing in entrepreneurship as the engine of human progress, there is no better future than to really inspire and support all companies to go in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcello. Maybe you could stop your screen share.
Sure.
There we go. Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you. And just in the spirit of full disclosure, Ubiquity University is a B Corp. And so we went through the process, and I can testify that it's a rigorous process. You really have to show, as Marcello indicated, in a variety of categories that you're, I would say, walking your talk. And you're really committed to both best business practice, but also ecological, sustainability, and it's well worth it. We're very proud of the fact that we're a registered B Corp. I'd want to just start this conversation with you and Epi. And Epi, you may have some points of view, so please put your video on and re-enter if you'd like, because we're going to talk about your subject matter as well in a moment. Marcello, one of the comments, well, there was a number of comments as you were making your presentation, which I think goes to some of the skepticism, I would say, of B Corps and green companies and socially responsible companies. And that is that basically it's more about image management than it is about substantive change. All the companies are motivated by profit. They're operating in an absolutely rapacious capitalist system. The companies that are listed often as sustainable companies or green companies are in fact doing a lot of damage to the planet. And several people, for example, noted that Nestle was in your list. And I think
not Nestle. Anyway, Procter & Gamble, but okay. It doesn't matter. Please.
They noted Nestle, so maybe they were incorrect, but Procter & Gamble would be another example. So that, how do you, as you know, this is a real question. Mobil Oil runs ads on national television weekly about them being an environmentally sensitive and supportive company. So you have a lot of, I would say, fake news in this domain. And I think it'd just be interesting to get your take on it. How does B Corp ensure that the companies that wear its insignia are really doing the right thing and not engaging behind the scenes in either, secret child labor in Pakistan or, dumping lead into rivers in the Amazon? How does B Corp monitor infractions to the standard?
So, I mean, I'll say three things. The first thing is that all of us, I would say 250 people who work in the B movement, plus all our partners, we would all say the same things that you were alluding to. In other words, and this is also the B Corp movement started from the smaller companies. For many years, until the last 2 or 3 years, we were only really doing, Kickstarter and Patagonia and the smaller companies. But of course, the world is moving on and bigger companies are waking up, and we also want to change capitalism. So we don't want to say no to larger companies, provided that they have a real intention to changing. So specific answer, take a company like Danone. Danone started a journey in 2015, and it will take them at least 7 years to complete the journey. But at every step, they have to pass the hurdles, plastic and organic food and inclusion, all the indicators that are part of the assessment of B Corp. So in that sense, we're very, very rigorous. And we are only doing, I showed some big companies, but I also, underneath those names, there were subsidiaries. So for example, Unilever is not a B Corp. Unilever owns 8 subsidiaries like Ben & Jerry that is a B Corp. So gotcha. Even within a big company like that, there are differences. And only some of the subsidiaries often can actually qualify to be certified. Including in this point is that there are 100,000 multinationals in the world. There are 250 million companies. So we are now doing Danone, Unilever, The Gap. We started in France with a couple more big companies. So we can count the multinational on one hand, more or less. So and this is why, and of course, we ourselves get pressure because we say, well, if you go on at this pace, we're never going to be able to change the economy. So it's a constant conversation with us. The point is, and of course, and then the second point to your question, Jim, is we are navigating in a system that is very destructive. And I would say mostly it's been the financialization of the economy. And this is the Wall Street, this is the shareholders above everything. And this is a challenge that many of these big companies are facing. And this is also why we have more family businesses, because they're not subject to the distant shareholders. So it is a hard slog. Absolutely agree with you. The point is, we can't ignore some of these larger companies. We want to change them. And so we choose the best we can, and only the best, and we work with the best. Now, so this is the second point. The third point I wanted to make, because EPI is in Singapore. I love Singapore. I've been there, for on and off for 30 years. Singapore became what it has become because it has had a very well-governed economy. You have to have a well-governed economy. And sometimes when we talk about corporations and capitalism, we can be a bit romantic in thinking that we can live without the good economy. But of course, the good economy is a foundation for many of the things that we have seen being extraordinary in history, whether it's the Renaissance or other, the artistic revolution. So we need a good economy. And this is also part of what we are working with Pope Francis and his commission, or what is the good economy? And the subject of the work with the Catholic Church is the decade of the good economy, the next 10 years. How do we turn this into a good economy? So this is the beginning. This is by no means the end. We are really hoping to bring as many companies in this direction as possible. And then the final generic point, half the stuff we buy, we don't need to buy. So who needs to buy all the stuff we have? So the challenge of having created a consumer society isn't only a challenge to be resolved by a corporation. It's a challenge that we have to resolve as a society, including citizens, including investors, including our government. So there, I completely agree with you. In a way, a Ben & Jerry ice cream isn't going to save the world. Maybe we shouldn't even be eating Ben & Jerry ice cream, but we are all in this together. And so we have to change. And this is where I was very excited about EPI, because this is how we can mobilize citizens and people to really change the rules of the economy.
Yeah. Epi, what would be your comment on all this? Thank you, Marcello. That was a very good answer.
Well, I think it's the beyond mobilizing people, it's sensitizing people, all right? And that sensitizing people needs to happen in a way that it's in alignment with their purpose, and with their passion. And I think this is what has not happened. You'll be surprised, Jim. You'll be surprised, Jim. You go around the world. I've been traveling all around the world for the past 7 years. You'll be surprised how many people they go to work, and not even 95% of what they do at work every single day is not aligned with what their passion is for, or what their purpose is. No wonder we have a messed up world. And I'm like, you're 55 and you have not worked that out? You're 60, you have not worked that out? It's like, when do you want to work that out? When? When? Because, like the world is going crazy. When? So we need people to wake up. And this is the issue that we have. We pay too much attention to the entertainment. When can we stop? I have nothing against the entertainers, but when can we stop paying entertainers more than we pay our teachers? I mean, it's ridiculous. And so it comes with the education system. I think everything is about education. We need to teach people the right thing. And I think that's where it starts. So education needs to be complete reform. Once we have the education in place, we have everything in place. And what you're doing is great. How many people we know like you, what you're doing? It's a handful of them. So I think we need innovators in the education system that is in alignment with people's purposes and passion. And then we have a big changes. Because the problem that we have today is that the problem of a human heart is the heart of a human problem. We can't change the human heart without changing the heart of the human problem. We've been going after thinking these are the assets, like having a condo, having an apartment, having a car, thinking that those are assets. Those are liabilities for most of us. So the education system plays a big role, and I think we need to change that very quickly. So that's my take.
Well, I want to add one thing. We have 1 minute. I want to think. So before the lockdown started, my last trip was to Bhutan. So about 12 of us went to Bhutan end of February this year, because Bhutan, have developed this gross national happiness. So they don't measure their progress through just GDP, but they have a much richer system of indicators where they look at happiness, they look at freedom, they look at level of education, they look at equality, and it's very holistic assessment. It's wonderful, it's beautiful. But even Bhutan, that of course has also 130 years of Buddhist tradition, even there, it's not a perfect system. And there are complaints, and there are people who take advantage of others, and you have cowboy capitalists. So I'm only saying this because I completely agree with you, Epi, but I think that we live in an imperfect world. So even the question that Jim, you were asking, of course, we would love to have every company in the world become a regenerative company. But probably not every company will become. Maybe 50%, 40%. I don't know what the percentage is, because this is also a human reality that it is not always perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think that leads to a very obvious question, starting with you, Epi. Humanity Rising is being convened to galvanize the kind of social activity and passion necessary to solve major global problems. What Marcello just said is absolutely true. We're in a very, very imperfect world. And in fact, it's so imperfect that it is spinning out of control, at the center of which is runaway climate change. We all know that. And we have probably this next decade to solve the problem, or we may even lose the world as we know it. You probably have spent more time on different aspects of crowdsourcing and the power of the crowd, of masses of people coming together. As you look at humanity rising, as you look at the critical challenges of solving critical problems, would you begin applying what you know about crowdsourcing to an endeavor like Humanity Rising? I mean, I want to just give an example of this out of what just happened with George Floyd. He's killed on TV, incontrovertibly a killing. Huge protests, but no unity. And that was a comment made at the funeral by his family, that you have these protests, but you don't get into crowdsourcing. You know, if you just think, everyone, of what would have happened had all the individuals and groups that protested the George Floyd murder around the United States and the world come together, and you had 100,000 people times 10 or 20 or 30, all organized around a common purpose, you would have seen real change. So what you're kind of delving into, Epi, is in some ways the mysterium tremendum of social change, which, if we could figure it out, could immeasurably enable us to move forward under current world circumstances.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Jim. There is, you know, I just wish like George Floyd will tell his story. And I think the stories that we're hearing and all these things that are happening all around the world, he probably would not want to see this kind of craziness that's happening. I think it's important to understand that we are just an experience in this planet Earth. We are just an infinite expression. It doesn't matter what color. I told you, like when I went to the United States as a young boy, because my main goal was to go to the United States to provide for my mother, to pay for her apartment, and because my dad passed away and we have 4 kids and there was no jobs and Yugoslavia was going through all these turmoils, I could not understand until I went to Georgia and I found out there is a racism. I could not understand how could somebody hate someone because of the color. But the question that we're asking, we're not asking the right question. We're not going deep enough. This was pre-Trump, this was pre-Obama, this was a long time ago. And I think is that what we are facing here is that we're facing the algorithms are taking control here. We're seeing these big platforms moving information the way how they want to move information. We have mass media today. There are primarily not in investigative journalism, which investigative journalism, as you know, is probably almost over. They're in the business of the opinion making. And they bring every single 5 minutes, they bring the pundits, and every pundit has another opinion. So where's the information? Where's the freaking information? This is the question we need to ask. Where's the real information? And so unless we really ask these questions, it's hard to find the truth. The intelligent people, they're always looking for the 3 sides of the story: the left, the right, and the middle, the truth of the story, that the edge. The intelligent people, they live on the edge. And we need to live on the edge. We need to look at the things from both sides. I think we need to, we have an obligation ourselves to ask that big why. Why am I in this earth? Why I was brought in this earth? There's a reason why you and I were in this earth. And I think, like, you know, I'm blessed. I'm so blessed that I found that out 7 years ago. I was going all around the world, all that stuff, until 7 years ago, I found myself that I said, oh my God, this is my why. And I stood with that why. And that's the reason I said, we must respect God's creation. This is it. All technology advancement is awesome, it's great. But the moment that we are entering the era where we are interrupting, I will tell you a story. Every year when we used to do our conferences here in Singapore, we used to bring our team in Singapore, and after conference, we used to go to the Phi Phi Island, a very beautiful island in Thailand. And there, what happens in the first time we went there, we were not aware of the sea urchins. So all of us, we got bit. And finally we go back to the hotel, we asked them, like, why don't you just like take these urchins and serve them as a meal and don't leave them in a beach? He said, well, if we do that, we break the chain. We cannot break the chain. This is the nature. And I think we need to make sure that we're not breaking the chain. Otherwise we are completely doomed. And I think everyone has an obligation to ask these questions and to find the truth. And the truth will set us free. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, a very wise man said that the truth will set you free. and
you know, Jim, what we did to him.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Marcello, what's your comment on this question of how the mechanisms of crowdsourcing can empower social movements like Humanity Rising, or even, you know, the growth of regenerative business?
So I love it. I am also on the board of SIX, which is the Worldwide Social Innovation Exchange based in London. And my colleague and founder, Jeff Mulgan, has written a couple of books on this power of collective intelligence. His last book is called Big Mind. I really recommend it. You might want to look at it. And that shows how, and this is interesting, you know, using EPIC's, you know, intelligence. Big Mind, the book, is really about how we as humans can avail ourselves of some of this AI and the power of technology for human objectives. So I think that we cannot do away with it, because that's technology and you know, human creativity are there, but the question is, how do we actually channel and marshal whatever technology there is for the benefit, so the human. So Jeff is writing in this book. So in SIX has 16,000 social innovators in our network. It started about 12 years ago. And we talk about the questions that Epi raised a lot. And I think I would love to have a separate conversation with you, Epi. Maybe we can do something together, because it's, for us, it's the beginning, you know. Only now in the last 2 or 3 months, we had a board meeting 3 days ago, and suddenly, instead of convening meetings and organizing, we have to do everything online. So this is opening a lot of opportunities of going further with crowdsourcing. So like you're doing here, Jim, it isn't, you know, 700 people, 1,000 people, or 2,000 like State of the World Forum. This is 15,000 people. So how do we actually do this in a clever way? So I'm very excited about the possibility. Within the work of B Corps, we are definitely exploring this, because as I said earlier, some of these larger companies have huge ecosystems. And some of these large companies have millions of customers, billions of customers. So you may remember many years ago, Ben and Jerry would use the package of the ice cream to do an anti-gun campaign in the US. So imagine what you could do now with all these consumers online. You could reach really billions of consumers with the sort of, you know, appeal, not appeal, but inspiring and raising everyone's consciousness. So these companies can be very valuable as vehicles to reach hundreds of millions of people. And then, of course, there is some of the questions you, Jim, you're very familiar with about how you really, I think there's a question of leadership and inspiration. Reaching these people is only the means, but the real question is, and then what? How do we help all of us to strive towards this, regenerative, spiritual, more noble objectives for the whole of humankind? So I think that the work that you're doing here, Jim, is fantastic in being able to bring us closer to this kind of possibilities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcello. Well, we're starting to get close to the end of our time together today. This has been an extraordinarily rich conversation. And so I think we'll just move to final words. And why don't we start with you, Marcello? We'll go in reverse order. Just a final comment given this conversation, then Epi, and then Rod. I don't know whether you're still with us, but if you're still with us, it would be wonderful to have you give us a final word. There you are. Great. And then we'll conclude our session. So Marcello, then Epi, and then Rod.
So my final word is really a word of thanks for the work you've done, Jim, and you're doing, because I think you are really onto something that has momentum. And I'm looking forward to stay connected and see whether also from the B Corp movement perspective, there are things that we could do together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcello. Epi.
Yeah, Jim. Well, thanks for having me, and really looking forward to develop our further partnership together in many ways and bring the conversations, important conversation that matters. I think I just want to leave this that we must pay attention to love. Love is not the word. Love is that you give. And what Mother Teresa said, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. So let's not judge people, let's love them first. And that's the most important thing that we must do right now.
Very profound. Very profound. Thank you. Yeah, if you're judging, you don't have time to love. You don't have room to love. And if you love, then you're not going to have room for judgment. That's a beautiful point. And at the heart of Juneteenth Day, actually. Rod.
Firstly, man, I am definitely blessed to be a part of the panel and listening in to all of the wealthy information. And just a few statements, man. The connection, drawing connections to much larger movements, I think is incredibly important right now. As I've seen some of the comments in the chat in regards to what's next, what do we do next? And I think that's a question that we'll be asking for some time. But I think with movements such as Marcello and Epi and Jim, yourself, who are placing people who've already housed movements that are global movements, I think it's really important that people begin to make connections to these entities and support these kinds of businesses, because these are the already existing wheels that are moving forward and have been moving forward for some time. So I think it's important that people are aware of the resources and the information that's out there, so that as we go through the chaos, as Peter Mary would say, the chaos to chaotic to then order, I think it's important that we recognize that and know what places that we can actually go to make these connections. One of the last things I'll make a statement of is that we really do need to hold love in tension for our police officers and for our authorities, because I do have loved ones and friends who are in law enforcement, and the things that they see on a daily basis outside of some of the things we're seeing in the media. I think it's extremely important to recognize some of the traumas that our police officers are encountering on a daily basis. And it's not easy for many of them with these compounded events that are happening. And so I think that we definitely need to hold our law enforcement in a certain kind of love and tension so that they can also have the kind of inner fortitude to make it through these chaotic moments. And that we overall, man, let's continue to unite together, have the conversations, understand that unity does not mean sameness, and that we can appreciate each other's differences and those different approaches as we are approaching or tackling or going over the hurdles of change. And so we need to respect that and make the intention to keep moving forward.
And with just one more thing that I'd like to add here is that let's not focus in all this tech out there about AI or whatever. Let's focus about bringing the action intelligence here. And the action is like, go and say to someone, I love you, I care about you, what can I do for you? This is what we can do today, and this is the most powerful thing that we can do.
Beautifully put, all of you. It's amazing to me how consistently the word love and the word heart has been surfacing in our discussions for Humanity Rising. You know, the man who knows probably more about crowdsourcing than anybody, at least I know of, you know, when asked how does one apply it, it's about loving people. It's about acting with integrity. It's about taking responsibility of your own life and your own future and your own values and your own choices. And I think that's the beauty of what you've brought today, Marcello. I mean, it's extraordinary that, you know, if you think 20, 30 years ago, we were begging companies to please do better. And, but there was no norms, there was no standards. And what B Corp represents is really the beginnings of an accreditation system, the beginnings of a global standard by which people can actually make judgments as to whether Nestle or Procter & Gamble or Unilever or XYZ Corporation are actually going to walk their talk. And now the B Corp is going B and beyond. And so that the growth, you know, it's like Chekhov says, you know, drop by drop, we squeeze the slave out of ourselves. Drop by drop, we squeeze the slave out of ourselves. And I know, Marcello, since I've known you for 30 years, just how laboriously you've toiled to get companies to do the obvious. And I think we're right at this kind of a tipping point. And maintaining our heartfulness and our integrity of spirit is the key ingredient as we move forward. And tomorrow, by the way, we're going to be talking about the heart. We're going to take a pause. And I'm going to be in dialogue with Roland McCrotty, who is the Director of Research of the Heart Math Institute. And we're going to dedicate the whole session to heart coherence and how each and every one of us can spend literally minutes a day attuning ourselves with our own hearts. And Epi, I just have to say, I was so struck that what you said, that the problem of the human heart is at the heart of the human problem. So tomorrow, we're going to go to the human heart and we're going to learn about the human heart. So if you have the time, it's going to be an extraordinary session because Roland is going to lay out all the science around heart coherence. And then we're going to hear from Teresa Collins and Claudia Wells, who are the co-founders of the global coherence pulse. As Marcello said earlier, there is increasing scientific data that the power of the crowd, the power of cohesion in large groups reverberates through the entire planetary ecosystem. Human thought affects weather. Human coherence. So what they do is once a month, and I think it's going to be on the 21st, the very next day, people come in by the hundreds and thousands in one meeting to just work on being heart coherent. That has real power. You bring the heart and love and coherence into any organization or any system, and that coherence reverberates and actually changes the chaos beyond itself. So that's all of what we're going to be discussing tomorrow. And I want to close, Rod, by thanking you again, as a Black man in America. At the end of the time, what did Rod say? Let us love our police officers. Let us bear in mind that they're human beings too, that they're struggling with traumas of almost unimaginable scale on a daily basis. And so we've seen both sides of the coin from one young man. So on Emancipation Day, Rod, I just want to salute the elegance of your spirit, my friend. You brought it all together and you did it with such deep authenticity and purity of heart and with such a clear spirit of love that you brought healing to all of us today. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you again tomorrow, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time. And tomorrow will be on heart coherence.